From the beginning of time, mankind has turned to violence to settle disputes. But over time, we grew civilized and used our technology to foster better methods to resolving disputes. Not always. Then we said, you know what, there must be a better way. So we went back to the old ways, but applied rules to the confrontations. And so here we are. I did a series of videos on beat-em-ups, and now it's time for the one-on-one games to get their time in the spotlight. There are a lot of games to cover. Let's get started. While most gamers back in the 70s were playing games like this, and even this, Sega said, you know what, let's do something different. Oh, thank you. Heavyweight Champ was a one-on-one boxing game with pretty damn impressive graphics and large characters for that time. The unique controls here were two boxing gloves that you grabbed with each hand to simulate the punching motion for each one. Sega would revisit this series in 1987 when most of us arcade players saw the Heavyweight series for the first time. But it all started in 1976. Not only this series, but the one-on-one fighting genre in general. In 1979, vector graphics were the new thing, and Warrior was a title that took advantage of this emerging technology. This title was developed by Tim Skelly and had two knights fighting one another with swords. The problem with this arcade was that the processor could not handle both knights and their animation and the backgrounds all at once. So the cabinet had an overlay as well as a printed background where the characters would battle on top of. If you've seen the original Odyssey with the overlay screens, kinda get an idea of how this game played and looked. This may not be the first one-on-one fighting game, but this is the first weapon-based one-on-one game that I can find. So every genre had its breakout game. On the beat-em-up side, it was Double Dragon. On the hack and slash side, it was Golden Axe. For the one-on-one genre, it is Karate Champ. There is one game further on this list that blew the doors open for this type of gameplay, but Karate Champ was the first to popularize it. You started in the dojo, and then you moved on into a tournament with bonus stages thrown in to spice it up a bit. The game utilizes two joysticks, one to move and the other to use in conjunction with the movement joystick to perform certain moves. Now, it is not the best control setup for this type of a game, but for its time, it took the one-on-one genre one step forward, and it now lives famously in that arcade scene from Street Fighter the movie. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean Bloodsport.
You ready?
Bloodsport, was it? What am I thinking? Karate Champ would make it to the NES eventually, but in 1984 in Japan, gamers there would get Urban Champion, a black box title for the new Famicom system. The game introduced a stamina counter, and it also didn't confine the player to one screen only. You could knock each other back to another part of the street, either left or right. You eventually reached a manhole which you can be knocked into, and therefore making the other player the winner. In the meantime, you have to watch out for angry neighbors throwing stuff at you, and the police. I love this scene. The gameplay is slow, and the amount of moves is limited only to punches, but for a while, this was the only option for a one-on-one fighting game on the NES. Konami took the one-on-one genre one step forward again with Yer R Kung Fu. Is that how you pronounce it? I have no idea. I probably butchered it. The gameplay is much smoother and introduced a kick and punch button. It also used a stamina bar, a first for the genre. You had to fight 11 different opponents and then the game would just loop. But this was a step in the right direction, with the stamina bar being a feature that has become a regular in these type of games.
Commercial break.
Special announcement. Celebrate. Pizza Cabaret is now open at Grand Prix Racerama. Pizza Cabaret offers a mouth-watering menu. Homemade spaghetti with your favorite sauce. Sandwiches piled so high it takes both hands to hold. Thick, juicy, man-sized burgers cooked to order. Chicken wings and barbecued ribs that melt in your mouth. Pizza Cabaret's mouth-watering delicious pizza, oozing with cheese. So thick you need a knife and fork to eat it. And while you enjoy Pizza Cabaret's scrumptious food, feast your eyes on our exclusive stage show of animated musical characters that sing and play for you. They're so real, so cute, you'll love them. Plus, blow your mind in our gigantic electronic arcade with over 500 games. Experience go-kart racing no matter what age. Call Grand Prix Racerama. Ask about special rates for birthday parties and special rates for groups and organizations. For great food, thrills, chills, fun, and excitement. Don't wait. Bring your family, bring your friends today to Pizza Cabaret at Grand Prix Racerama on 441 just south of State Road 84, exit 12 on the Turnpike, Fort Lauderdale.
The original Street Fighter was not the best arcade fighting game out there. Let's just face facts. But it did look impressive and brought to the table some new features, such as 6 buttons for different attack types. Some cabinets even had this sensitive 2-button layout that was just terrible to use and maintain by arcade operators. The game also introduced motion-style special moves that could be performed by the 2 characters. There are a total of 10 characters, as well as 2 bonus stages, and I want to say speech. But the speech is a riot to hear, and a reminder that the industry still had a way to go until digitized speech was perfected. The game was actually named after a martial arts movie that was released in Japan called Clash Killer Fist, and was renamed Street Fighter when it was released in the West. The TurboGrafx CD port was renamed to Fighting Street. That's understandable since the arcade sucked and they wanted to sell the game to unsuspecting consumers. But thanks to this game, the fighting genre would soon be revolutionized and invigorated to monumental heights. But in 1987, you just had to make do with the original Street Fighter. Sorry. Warrior was the first weapon-based fighter, but Barbarian here was the first 2D weapon-based one-on-one game that was released on many computers of that day. This one that you see here is the Commodore 64 port. The gameplay is painfully slow, but Barbarian was a new style of one-on-one and deserves to be on this list. Now, just hold on a second. I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Double Dragon on the NES is not a one-on-one fighting game, you idiot. It is a beat-em-up, and you had it on another video, you moron. But you forget that it also has a mode B that is a one-on-one fighting mode. Here you could choose from 6 characters from the game. The downside is that you can only pick the same character for both players 1 and 2 or the CPU due to the limited RAM on the NES. However, if you can see past this slight limitation, you're gonna find a one-on-one fighting game that was a nice complement to a good side-scrolling brawler. Well, here it is. We knew it was coming. The arcade game we all knew had to be part of this list. I mean, how can it not? This right here is the big bang of the one-on-one fighting genre. There have been others before this, sure, but Street Fighter 2 brought so much new things to the table and it did it right. The graphics, the animation, the mechanics, the music, all of this came together to bring to the arcades something so revolutionary that you had to be there to experience how big this title was, not just for Capcom, but for the arcade business and gaming in general. Where do I begin? So, first off, the game introduced not only 6 new characters aside from Ryu and Ken, but each one of them had a specific story that tied them all to the Street Fighting tournament. Every new character had his or her specific set of moves, something that was totally new for the genre. While some might say that Chun-Li was the first female character to be available to play on a game like this, I am sorry to inform you that that honor goes to Typhoon Gal back in 1985, but Chun-Li would become one of the most iconic Street Fighter characters in the series. The controls were extremely tight, and the animations and overall speed of the game matched up perfectly with one another. And even though we know now that the combo system was actually a glitch in the game, gamers back then saw this as a new step in the evolution of fighting games. So much so that later ports in the games in this series and others took this idea and ran with it. The music was outstanding then, and it is still outstanding now. Gamers could not get enough of this game, and arcade owners took advantage of this and would pair up multiple cabinets of this game side by side, taking away much needed arcade retail space in the process, and keeping other arcade games from flourishing. Whether this is a good or bad thing, I leave that up to you. The game brought in millions to the arcades easily, and the Super NES and Genesis ports sold millions for Capcom, having moved around 6.3 million carts alone for the Super NES, and the arcade holds the title of most sold arcade coin-based fighting game of all time. With the demise of the arcade business in general, I think this is a title that it will not lose anytime soon. On a quick note before I move on to the next game, we found out years later that the 2 guys fighting in the intro have actual names: Scott and Max. One likes sparkly things and the other has a dislike for caterpillars. Now, to think that the greatest fighting game franchise ever boomed by 2 guys fighting over caterpillars and sparkly things. Now we go from an all-time high like Street Fighter 2 to an all-time low. 4D Sports Boxing is a fully 3D rendered polygon style game created by Distinct Software and published by Mindscape. While the gameplay is extremely sluggish to the point of being annoying, I have to give credit to the developers for bringing a full 3D style gameplay atmosphere to the table. There is no background sound of the crowd or even a bit of music playing during gameplay, but the game brought to the world the feel of polygons to a fighting game a few years before Virtua Fighter. Don't play this game though, ever. Just don't. Trust me. When Takashi Nishiyama left Capcom after creating the original Street Fighter, he landed a job at SNK. He wanted to create his true vision of what Street Fighter should have been with SNK, a game with emphasis on storytelling and timing special moves. This title and Street Fighter 2 were developed around the same time, but it's clear to see that the SNK board had nothing on the Capcom CP arcade board. This title only had 3 selectable characters, but it did introduce one main new feature never seen before: 2 planes to fight on. You could fight in the foreground or jump to the background. Sometimes I would be trying to execute a move and jump towards the back or the front and straight into the enemy's foot or fist. The world was introduced to the Bogart brothers and Joe Higashi. The gameplay felt stiff when compared to Street Fighter 2, but that was not the game's fault. Street Fighter 2 had set the bar so high that few games would be able to reach it, and gamers everywhere would always compare any fighting game to Street Fighter 2. Had this game been a little more polished, it might have gotten a little bit closer to that bar. Staying on the Neo Geo cabinet, King of the Monsters took the concept of the one-on-one fighting game and mixed it with monsters to bring along this fun arcade hit. You could choose from 6 different characters and you played on top of a huge city where you can land on buildings and structures and destroy them in the process. It was a bit like wrestling where you could also launch your enemy across the screen like tossing someone across the ring against the ropes for that type of wrestling effect. Plus you were fighting on top of a city, doesn't get better than that. The sequel was a bit more polished, but SNK brought a new approach to the one-on-one genre with this monster title. Get it? Monster title? Well, never mind.
Commercial break.
When the developers in Midway got the go-ahead to make a fighting game based on the Universal Soldier movie, they wanted to make it edgier and used digitized graphics to up the violent angle to it. But the deal fell through for some reason and they decided to go at it alone and create a violent game using the likes of Jean-Claude Van Damme to promote it. For some reason that didn't pan out either, but they still went through with the project, and thus Mortal Kombat was born. Its entry to the genre can't be understated. It soon became a solid and worthy rival to the Street Fighting arcade. Both games approached the genre differently enough to create a niche of their own in that same space of gaming. The digitized graphics and over-the-top violence was something that had never been tried in such a way, which, thanks to the lifelike graphics, made it all more real and therefore a lightning rod for controversy.
Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives, and I think it's time to draw the line. I know that one place parents want us to draw the line is with violence in video games. What you're about to see are scenes from 2 of the most violent new video games. First, we have Mortal Kombat, which is a martial arts contest involving digitized characters. We're going to show 2 versions of the game.
Games like Night Trap, Doom, and Mortal Kombat would eventually end up being a topic that Congress brought forth to the public, and how they may influence young kids and affect society in general when it came to violence in video games. It was due to these hearings right here that the ESRB was created, which nowadays I find completely useless when I see an adult parent buying a 6-year-old Grand Theft Auto 5. But I digress, moving on. Okay, now, what did Time Killers bring to the table? Great graphics. Nah, that's not it. Good controls. No, that's not it either. Good animation of the character. Yeah, right. Good music? No, that's not it. Oh yeah, decapitations of limbs. This game has you choosing from 8 characters from different time periods, hence the name of the game. The gameplay is extremely choppy, as is the overall animation for every single character. About the only interesting thing is that you can have your arm chopped off, or both of them, and somehow continue fighting. Yet it grows back on the next round, so what's the point? Okay, moving on.
Second round, engage.
3D back then was seen as the next graphical evolution in games, so when Sega brought to the arcades a one-on-one fighting game that took place in 3D that was actually playable and had good overall controls and gameplay mechanics, you knew that they had a winner in their hands. Virtua Fighter was the first fully 3D one-on-one with arenas and moving cameras to match the graphical achievement put on by Sega. We got introduced to 8 total characters, each with his or her own fighting style. There are no magic projectiles here, it's all strategy-based fighting, except for the jumping part. I mean, sure, you jumped like you were floating on the surface of the moon, but it was an early 3D title, so we can forgive Sega for the floaty jumping mechanics. Schmeiser Robo, along with the Famicom game Joy McFight, might be the first two games to incorporate robots into the fighting genre. Schmeiser Robo was released only in arcades though, and it was not heavily distributed, so it goes under the radar a lot. The game was developed by Hot B, which had done many games on home consoles up to that point, with this one here being the only entry into the arcade scene. Now, I don't know if this game bankrupted them or what, but this is the last game they ever did. The graphics are not that bad for their time, and the gameplay feels a little bit smoother than some of the first few Neo Geo fighting games. The difficulty is tough, but the controls are nice and responsive. Try it out if you get a chance. If Capcom perfected the fighting game formula with Street Fighter II, SNK did it with weapon-based fighting when it released Samurai Showdown for their Neo Geo arcade system. I can't begin to properly convey the reaction to not only a weapon-based fighter being this good, but to also see some characters utilize their pets as fighting companions during their matches was truly epic for that time. It was something new. Weapon-based fighters were usually slow for that time, but Samurai Showdown went all out in terms of gameplay speed and control. Everything felt responsive. The movements, the controls, the way special moves were performed, it was perfect. The music and entire art direction being heavily inspired by feudal Japan gave this title here a unique look and feel to it. What was also awesome was that you had fighters from around the world with different looks and fighting styles. The stages were also filled with lots of details. Samurai Showdown took that weapon-based one-on-one fighting game genre and raised the bar for it the same way Street Fighter II did a few years earlier. Truly an awesome game.
The full mask controls the world. I want the half that you hold.
The CD format was the other next big thing in the gaming landscape in the early to mid 90s. With that came the full motion games, and I use the word games loosely here.
Do you have the Mask of Fang too?
So Supreme Warrior was the first one-on-one fighting game to be played from first-person mode and using full FMV. And you might be saying to yourself, oh wow, this sounds awesome. It's not. The controls they're just not there. They don't seem to work properly. The only good thing I can say is that it does offer a new perspective to the fighting game genre. Play it for the cheesy overall story and the fight sequences. Avoid it if you feel like playing something that, might actually be fun. Jurassic Park took the world by storm in 1993. Dinosaurs were in. So it was only a matter of time before someone took the one-on-one fighting genre and threw dinosaurs into the mix. And Primal Rage was the result. Wait a minute, an actual good game from Atari? In the early 90s? The graphics on this game were also digitized. Reports indicate that Atari was able to actually carry out the experiments from the Jurassic Park movie to bring actual dinosaurs to life, to capture them and digitize their likeness for the arcade. simply amazing what Atari could do back in those days. Then again, those same reports also stated that the Atari Jaguar CD would be the next killer gaming add-on in the mid-90s, so take that with a grain of salt. The controls were simple, but I feel like you needed a degree in astrophysics to understand how to pull off some of the special moves. And despite all that, it's still fun to play, and it's one of the best dinosaur-themed one-on-one fighting games out there. Killer Instinct had the distinction of being one of Rare's rare arcade entry, and it was showcasing the Ultra 64 hardware. Ooh, yeah, it's BS. This is running on the Ultra 64 as it states, then the home port is probably running on the Ultra 32. I felt if I didn't mention this title on my video, someone out there would probably lose his or her head over it. But this game, to me at least, is way overhyped, and the overall gameplay is lacking. The characters look horrible even for that time, and the backgrounds and their movement all feel, I don't know, janky is the best way that I can put it. I think the only thing that has stuck with me over the years is how the announcer screams out the combo amount you perform in that kick-ass weekend monster truck rally commercial tone. SNK was thinking to themselves, how can we compete on the same playing field as Capcom? We have to come up with a new gimmick to the fighting genre. King of Fighters 94 used the new feature of the 3-team battle. You choose from a team of 3 fighters and you fight until all 3 of them lose. Another cool thing with this title is the short but impressive intros to each of the stages. I used to own this game on the Neo Geo, and it was one of my favorite fighters of that time. The controls are tight, the music is great, and the animations of the characters and the backgrounds all make good use of the power of the Neo Geo. Other titles in the series allow you to create your own teams, and the roster grew considerably over the years. But remember, it all started in '94. There are conflicting accounts as to how the idea for this game came about. Regardless of which is the true version, the bottom line is this: Capcom took their fighting game engine and gameplay mechanics and mixed it in with horror and monster themes. Some say that Capcom could not get the rights to the Universal monsters and so had to tweak their appearances and change up the names to avoid a lawsuit from Universal Studios. Darkstalkers uses the same engine as Street Fighter II, but brought along the ability to block mid-air and crouch walk, as well as a super meter that was similar to Super Street Fighter II.
Commercial break.
There are lots of good reasons to go with Sega Saturn instead of Pretendo. We call them games. Sega Saturn has tons of them. Pretendo has just a few. It does beg the question, do you want to play or twiddle your thumbs? Face it, Pretendo, you weren't worth waiting for.
Schmeiser Robo was the first one-on-one fighting game that brought in robots to the mix, at least from what I could gather from my research. But Cyberbots took the robot versus robot gameplay and gave it that distinct Capcom graphical touch. You can choose from 5 characters and then pick out from 12 different type of mechs, each with strength based on their build. There's also a lot of text outlining a story for each character before the beginning of each battle. The game doesn't really bring anything new to the table, but it looks amazing and it's a fun game and one that I would highly recommend to any fighting game enthusiast out there. Many would say that Super Smash Bros. Is the game that introduced the gaming world to the multiplayer 2D fighting brawl fest, but the Outfoxies here beat it by a few years. This little known arcade game from Namco has you playing as one of 7 assassins. A mysterious figure known as Mr. Acme has hired you to kill the other 6 assassins. The characters here are so different from one another in terms of appearances, and you can also use many weapons in the level to attack one another. Each stage also has unique layouts and objects and level designs that can be affected during gameplay, like the helicopter crashing down through the roof here. That's pretty damn cool. A very underrated arcade game that has never been officially released for any home console. Play it if you can, it is a lot of fun and very imaginative. When Samurai Showdown came out, it perfected the weapon-based one-on-one gimmick. So after that, there was only one thing left to do. Bring it to the 3D world. Battle Arena Toshinden was the first 3D weapon-wielding one-on-one fighting game, beating out Soul Edge by a year. It was a PlayStation exclusive on release and dubbed the Saturn Killer. I remember seeing this game and playing it on a demo kiosk at a Funkoland, and seeing it side by side with Virtua Fighter, it became quite clear that the PlayStation was not messing around. It was the new kid on the block, but it was coming out with guns blazing. Battle Arena Toshinden looked great, and that's where all the praise stopped. Sega took the robot versus robot idea, but now brought it into the 3D world with Virtual On. Mech vs. Mech games have been done before, but on a more slower paced strategic battle style system. Virtual On, however, was pure arcade fast action bliss, where you took on different style mechs in different arenas. You could choose from 8 different robots, each with specific weapons at their disposal. The controls are a bit difficult to get used to at first, but if you can get past that small obstacle, you are in for a fun experience. This title spawned a series that you really ought to try out if you've never played any of them before.
Get ready.
Red Earth brings nothing new to the table, but when am I going to talk about this game? It was never released outside of the arcades until it finally got ported to the new generation of consoles in 2022. That's right, you heard me correctly, it took Capcom 26 years to port this to a console. This game was the first to utilize the Capcom CP3 board and has some of the most imaginative characters and some great animations to boot. It is also heavily driven by a storyline that plays out the more you progress. Again, nothing revolutionary here, but it is a very solid one-on-one fighting game that still holds up quite well in today's gaming scene.
No.
mercy. Attack!
I feel that if I don't include this game on my list, I'm gonna feel guilty about it. Guilty Gear took the Street Fighter formula and infused it with manga and some unique characters that really stood out among the crowded one-on-one titles of that time. This game was created by Team Neo Blood, which was spearheaded by Daisuke Ishawatari, who had created the characters of the game. Guilty Gear uses a mechanic where a player can perform an instant kill technique that, if successfully pulled off, can end the match right there and then, even if the player was on the verge of losing.
Have a nice day.
This brought about a whole new strategy to such a game. The button layout was also tweaked with 4 buttons for regular and strong attacks and 2 others for special moves. To say that Guilty Gear had an impact on 2D fighting games is an understatement. It has gone on to have over 20 entries in the series, with a new one currently in development as of early 2024.
Marvel vs. Capcom. Marvel vs. Capcom.
I know it doesn't really bring anything new to the table, but come on, it's Marvel vs. Capcom. It took most of the features from the first 2 in the series, X-Men vs. Street Fighter and Marvel superheroes, and improved on them and added characters to the overall roster from Marvel and Capcom, along with predetermined characters from various Capcom titles to assist your team during battle. It also allowed you to use a combo attack where both of your fighters perform a super attack at the same time to deal some major damage to your opponents. This game is a ton of fun to play at any time. Part 2 for me is perfection, but my fascination with the franchise started right here.
Don't mess with the Cajun.
Soul Calibur was not only one of the most impressive looking games to date, but it had extremely deep fighting mechanics to complement them. This title was ported from the arcades to the Dreamcast in time for its launch. And I remember seeing this game and I could not believe what I was looking at. And once I bought it, all the intricate mechanics slowly unraveled before my eyes the more I played it. It was awesome. It had a very deep storyline for each character, fully open fighting arena, meaning your character had full open movements in all directions, blocking techniques that allow you to not only defend, but to repel opponents or stun them, allowing you to go from defensive to an offensive position almost seamlessly if timed accordingly. The Dreamcast version also had a story mode. Now when I saw this title, I said to myself, there is no way that the Dreamcast could fail with games like this, especially at launch. There's just no way. Then it failed. Crap. Did Outfoxies inspire the Smash Bros. Series? Who knows? But Nintendo took their cute mascots from various IPs and placed them together in an arena where up to 4 players could battle it out at the same time. This right here was multiplayer mayhem. Speaking of stages, some were small and some were large enough that players could walk away from each other with the camera needing to zoom out to get a good view of the entire layout. The game also had no power meter. Instead, you would deplete your opponent's power until their number reached 0, making your opponent easier to knock off the stage. You could continue to do this until the round is over. Whoever had the most knockouts would win the match. This was a new innovation that many other companies would try and copy, but once again, it was Nintendo that would perfect it. And so this right here wraps up the fighting game genre pre-2000s. I am well aware that there were many, and I'm talking many great titles or just overall games that I did not mention here. The one-on-one fighting genre was the huge boom of the 90s along with the move to 3D. There were hundreds of fighting games released during this time, and I wanted to concentrate on games that brought new mechanics and innovation to the genre, and yes, some just out of popularity or just great gameplay. But again, there's so many games out there and not enough time. And this video is already long enough as it is. Now, what are some of the best one-on-one fighting games that you have played during the late 80s and all of the 90s? That does not have the Street Fighter name on it. What are some of the worst? Fight history. Sorry, something in my throat. Be back here as I wrap up this series with the 2000s and up to the present day. Until then, keep watching and keep gaming.
Yeah.